Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Comprehensions Strategy Workshop. My name is Cynthia, one of the instructors with Iris Reading. Happy to see you. Just so sorry, I have to turn on my camera. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Really quickly want to ask where you're joining us from today. So we are broadcasting live from Chicago, and Iris Reading is actually based out of Chicago as well. We have a second office now in Miami. If you'd like to share again where you're joining us from, and also, have you ever heard of Iris Reading? We have offered a few of our workshops in over 100 cities around the world. So we're obviously very proud of that, but we are also looking to expand. So drop in the comment section or in the chat section, I'm sorry. Again, if you've ever heard of us, if you've ever taken a live, we will be offering a few live workshops throughout the United States over the next coming weeks, and we might be coming to a city near you. So definitely check that out. Today, we are again talking about comprehension, and it's not necessarily something that always happens automatically, right? Sometimes we struggle. And it obviously depends on the kind of material that we are, getting through. So we're going to talk about a few things that can help improve our comprehension when it's maybe not something immediate. Really quickly, we will also be referencing a few documents. I will share them on my screen, but if for some reason you maybe can't see them, if you maybe, and you never know when you maximize something on YouTube, maybe it's a little pixelated. So you can always pull up these documents in a separate tab. So sorry, the coffee hasn't kicked in yet. In a separate tab, and you just type in irisreading.com/comp, C-O-M-P, obviously for comprehension. Really quickly, also want to share our social media. So we are on social media now, officially. Very excited for that. We are slowly growing our Instagram and our TikTok following. We also have our official Facebook page, but we also, on top of that, have a book club on Facebook, and that's called Book Lovers Assemble. So if you want to see what we're reading this week, I am about to upload biggest takeaways from the book of the week, which was The Tattooist of Auschwitz, I believe. So if you want to hear a little bit about what was going on in that book, definitely check us out on our book club on Facebook. And obviously you are watching us on YouTube, so you are aware that we do have a YouTube channel. So if again you do enjoy the content that we share with you all today, please, we would appreciate a like, a subscription, a follow, if you could. Now, we do have something called the Iris method here at Iris Reading, right? And it is essentially a 4-step process when it comes to approaching any reading, any learning, any memorization. You might have heard of something called like the study cycle. This is our version of the study cycle. And I'll really quickly break down each of the 4 important principles in our Iris method. Again, you may you may be familiar with a few of these if you have attended a workshop in the past, and this is a great time for me to share actually the other workshops that we offer throughout the week. So we talk about inspecting and reading primarily in our speed reading workshop. Okay, that's again what we're known for here at Iris Reading. Excuse me. And so if you want to maybe learn how to be a little bit more of a productive reader, the speed reading workshop is really something amazing. I'd say the majority of the participants that come through in our speed reading workshop, they make significant progress throughout either the 60-minute or the 90-minute session. So we talk about inspecting anything you want to read before you read it, okay? Most of us are probably just automatically will start reading something from beginning to end, but there's a problem when doing that, right? Our attention span is not always there. It's not always invested in what we're reading. Maybe, as I said earlier, the coffee hasn't kicked in yet. We're still kind of wake up, right? Or maybe it's later in the afternoon and we're just drained and over caffeinated and overwhelmed, right? So inspecting, not only does it help us get a better understanding of what we're about to read, but it also helps us with our concentration. So first step, we encourage you to inspect, followed by our second step, which is obviously read or don't read, okay? So inspecting, I'm not sure if I shared this. I am a student currently, and I have a professor that just loves to send over all of the books and all of the articles and all of the everything over the weekend, right? He'll probably send me on average about 7 to 8 emails with something you should read in the subject line. And so, I'm thinking if it's obviously my professor, then maybe he is, this is something that is important, right, to our major. But that's not always the case, right? So inspecting helps save me a lot of time. Okay, and so after I inspect, that's when I can decide, am I going to read this or maybe not, or maybe just not right now. So it's important, again, it helps us with our comprehension because we are kind of like prepping the land, right? After we read, we want to ask questions, all right? And again, we're going to talk about these questions today. However, these questions that we're going to ask are really important when note-taking. Okay, most of us, again, maybe just get into the habit of writing everything down and not really thinking about if we even understand it, right? Because most of us don't have a teacher standing by 24/7, ready and willing to answer questions, right? And so if you're writing something down right now that doesn't make sense, well, how will it make sense later? Okay, so we want to improve our comprehension there as well. Ask all the questions when we're taking notes. I know this can seem like, again, a very overwhelming thing to do, especially when you're in lecture with someone that's talking and it's just so fast and the subject is confusing and everything is just, all the emotions are everywhere. But again, we have a systematic approach to that. So if you would like to maybe learn some different note-taking techniques, we do offer that workshop as well. And obviously, as our third step, we want to make sure that you are understanding everything, asking all the questions, you're able to answer all the questions before you move to the final step, which is storing. Okay? If you don't get something, if it's not making sense, if it's not clicking, we don't want you to try to memorize it. And speaking of memory, we are also known for our memory techniques workshop. So if, again, you are looking to maybe just learn some different techniques, some different strategies to help you memorize something, that memory workshop is definitely for you. And it's also my favorite one to teach, by the way. So I hope we get to work together in the future. So again, this is our 4-step process. Again, we're gonna tie in comprehension here today. This, by the way, is brand new workshop we've launched this month. So I am excited to hear your feedback at the end of the presentation. I hope that you find it beneficial. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat or in the comment section or in the comment section in the bottom of the video, and we will definitely get to them. Now, as we said in the beginning, with comprehension, it's not always something that's automatic, right? It's not always something that happens as you read. I wish that was the case, but it just isn't, right? So we have a few questions that we want you to familiarize yourself with, and we want you to use these questions as we're reading, all right? We want to think of it almost like 6 different dimensions to better understanding a subject, anything you need to read, all right? Maybe most of us sometimes are just good, we're just okay with just knowing it, right? I know it, that's it, that's enough. But is that the case, right? Is that enough? Is just simply knowing a fact but not knowing everything underneath that fact, what affected that fact, how that fact came to be? Do we really know something then? can we really say that we comprehend? All right, so we're going to talk about, again, those 6 different dimensions. Number 1 being explanation. So as you read something, as you're learning something, I want you to be able to explain it, or we here at Iris Reading want you to be able to explain it. Unfortunately, however, this is the step that most people kind of just like, okay, I can somewhat explain it, so I'm good, I get it, we're good to take the test now. And that's not always the case, right? Just because you can explain it to the wind, that doesn't mean that you actually know it. All right, so we'll talk about explaining and the benefits of explaining it to different people, whether that be children, right? Maybe you have a little brother or sister, maybe your own teacher, maybe a parent, maybe someone, if you speak a second or third language, maybe explaining it in that second or third language. And we will explain why this is so important in just a moment. Second, what are the different perspectives on whatever you're learning? Okay, there have to be different perspectives, right? We're going to break a subject down today, and you might be surprised with these different perspectives that I was able to dig up on the subject. And I'm going to tell you what the subject is just yet, but I think most of us are going to be a little shocked when we see some of the information that I have dug up. Now, again, if you're able to explain it, that's great, but can you defend it against someone else's point of view on the subject, or their take on that subject, or maybe someone that opposes whatever it is you're reading? Why do they oppose it? Do you understand why they oppose it and how that maybe fits or doesn't fit in what you think you already know? All right, because again, we're talking about these 6 different areas or 6 different dimensions to better comprehend. The truth is we don't always know what questions we should be asking, right? Maybe some of us go back to school a couple years after we graduate high school, so we maybe even forgot how to learn, but that's okay because we are going to help you today. Third dimension, if you will, is your self-knowledge. All right, how does this apply to you? What does this have to do with you, right? And we might think that sometimes. I remember thinking that in algebra class in high school. I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to need to use this. What does this have to do with me? Of course, right? That's kind of where that's just kind of where that thought ended, right? And I was pretty much miserable taking that class. Or I think you take algebra for a couple years in high school, right? You take 1, 2, and the point is that it does apply to you. Okay, we just have to figure out how it applies to you. And once we figure that out, obviously our comprehension will be better, or we'll deepen our comprehension on a subject. So that is our third area. Fourth is empathy. All right, can you empathize with this subject? Think about it. Who is an expert in this field and why? The author that wrote whatever you're reading, why? Why did they write it? Okay. What was the motivating force for them to, write this down? And, to a point where maybe you're studying it in university or you're studying it in high school. How did it get to that point? And more so, why? Okay. Because again, we're going to tap into our feelings a little bit here and see what the motivating force was. Okay, because that again can help deepen our comprehension. How can this be applied practically? Practical application. All right, because again, maybe sometimes we are more consumed with just reading and memorizing and not so much giving it real world application. All right, I will share a little about myself. A couple years, more like 12 years ago, I graduated nursing school, and there were a lot of policies that I had to memorize, right? We had not only to take written exams, but also we had to go and actually practice, which sounds terrible, but it's really not that bad, right? Where you practice your skills on other patience, right? There's got to be a better way to say that. But the point is, you want to find some practical application. Now, something that I struggled with was that I would ace the exam, right? The written exam, but when it came to applying the information practically, I felt confused. All right. I wasn't sure. I was like, why does this paper say I know how to do this when I don't feel like I do? I don't know what any of this means, right? So we want to think about how we can apply that later on, whether you're going to do it in the moment, whether you're going to do it a couple of years down the line, right? Just practicality, simplification, okay? And our final dimension is interpretation. How has this been interpreted by others? Okay. Now, of course, we could say from language to language. Yeah, there are various interpretations on a specific piece of literature. You read something in English and then you maybe read it in another language and you're like, that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, right? For if you speak a second or third language, interpretation and translation, they can be kind of funny sometimes. And don't even ask Google, because Google will sometimes completely botch up whatever you are trying to interpret. However, we're not talking about that kind of interpretation today. We're going to think a little more outside of that box, way, way out there. Maybe an artistic interpretation, artistic representation on a subject, maybe a piece of music that has been written inspired by this subject. Okay, so all of these things we're about to break down right now with a subject that I would imagine most of us are somewhat familiar with. We'll see. Okay. But before we do that, let's assess our current standard basic comprehension. All right. So what we're going to do, remember well, let's talk about this real quick. I'm sorry. I shared a Dropbox link with you all earlier. We're going to use it in just a second, but we're all familiar with like what are they, like the reading comprehension exams, right? And most of us, unfortunately, they're timed. Uh, and so we'll take these exams, and let's say you answer 19 of the 38 questions. Even if you got them correct, you would still only get a 50%, right? Which is a little wacky when it comes to these comprehension exams. So obviously, our goal would be to read more and get more questions obviously correct. But again, our comprehension, it's just not always something that is present at the time. We don't get it automatically, right? So we want to improve that, especially if we're maybe looking to take like a standardized reading test in the future, or really any standardized exam that will require some kind of reading, whether that be LSAT, MCAT, SAT, ACT, right? We want to get faster at comprehending, obviously faster at reading, since that is our number one class here at Irish Reading, but also at comprehension. So let's just see what our overall comprehension is on. I'm going to share that document with you all. Again, irisreading.com/comp, and you're going to look for the document entitled Focus Rituals.pdf. All right, we're going to read it, or we're going to read as much as we can together. So you'll notice it's right here on my screen. You'll see this timer going off in the middle right here. Read normally. This is not a race. And then I just want to see, afterwards, what your overall comprehension is. How do you feel you understood the information? All right, so for this, I will disable my webcam and I will also turn off my mic, and we will just read. Don't worry about reading everything. You don't have to read the entire thing. Just read normally for the next 2 minutes and we'll talk about it. All right, so here we go. 2 minutes. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so we just kind of had a little warm up this morning, reading a little bit. All right, now we read focus rituals, pretty standard material, right? Not too spicy, not too complicated. Assess your comprehension now. So what if you had to give yourself like a percentage based on what you just read when we're talking about comprehension? So would you say you understood 60% of what you read, 70, 80, 20, right? Give me a percentage in the chat if you'd like to. Again, this is really without talking about everything we're about to talk about right now. So we'll do this assessment right now, and then we will do it again in the end with a different article, and we'll compare both of our scores that we give ourselves when it comes to this comprehension. We'll see if maybe, right, implementing some of these strategies. And I know this is a quick session. We only have 30 minutes left together. So again, you always are welcome to come back to our YouTube to rewatch it, or you can always email us if you have questions, all right, on the subject. Maybe you want a little more support on that, and that is okay. Okay, so just give yourself a percentage based on what you think, right? If you understood something, 90, 80, whatever your percentage may be. Now, let's break down this one subject that I mentioned in the beginning. I think that most of us are pretty aware, right? We learn about it, I would say, in third grade. Yeah, about third grade, fourth grade, we start learning about gravity, right? We learn about gravity. We know things will hit the ground if they fall off a table, if they fly off the shelf, right? If someone drops something, we have no question in our minds that it will fall down and it will not go up, right? Unless it's a balloon. So, is that it? Is that all we need to know about gravity? Well, let's talk about it. Now, as I said, most of us are aware of that fact, right? But can you explain the theory of relativity to me? Can you break it down? Okay. In relation to gravity again. Can you explain how quantum physics ties in to gravity? Okay. Right? Some of us might be like, no, I don't know that. What are you talking about? Or maybe someone does, right? And what how distance plays its part in gravity? Now you might be thinking, oh, wait a minute. Well, no, I guess not, right? We have a general understanding, but can we say we actually comprehend all of the intricacies involved with gravity? Okay, so how can we apply this with our first step, right? Or how can we apply explanation here? All right, so again, most of us can explain, right? If the apple goes up, it's gonna come back down. If something falls off the tree, it's gonna hit the ground, right? If I drop my phone, it's going to hit the ground, okay? But we don't want you to explain it to the wind. I mean, it is important, right, to just talk it out, hear yourself explain something. That is great, right? But we also want you to explain it to other people, whether that be a classmate, as we said, a colleague, a teacher, a child. Now, the goal is to get people to ask you questions. Why? It doesn't have to be anything deep and philosophical. Just why, right? You might have, if you have like a 5 or 6-year-old, you explain something to them and they ask you, but why, right? And that reminds me of this on Reddit, there's this explain like I'm 5, right? If you're familiar with that. So you would have to simplify your explanation. Okay, and that kind of reminds me of Feynman's technique, right? Where I think one of the steps is explaining something in technical terms, but also explaining something in simple terms. Okay, because if you can give me the very elaborate explanation on gravity, but you can't simplify it because you're maybe just, you can't, maybe that might be because you were just repeating something we've memorized from the passage, the dictionary, the textbook, and that doesn't mean that we understand it. Okay? So again, we want to make sure we are explaining. And if we speak another language, that's good, right? We can maybe explain it to someone in that other language, right? And that again will kind of get those juices flowing in your mind so that we are not regurgitating what we have memorized, but we actually understand and can explain what we've learned. Now, we've got the ball rolling down the ramp, right? Or down the driveway. That doesn't really look like a ball. We're going to have to fix this picture. But the point is, we're not going to worry about it going up. We know it's going to go down. But can you explain, I'm going to pretend like I'm 6 now or 5. Can you explain to me why? Right? Why? Anybody want to take a whack at it? Now, if you can't explain it, tremendous. Now, notice we're not going to answer the question, but we are starting to ask questions that you maybe are not asking when we're reading, right? Because again, I said, we don't always necessarily know how to comprehend. It's not something that's just happening super duper fast. Okay, so we'll ask a lot of questions and we're actually going to leave a lot of those questions unanswered because we wanted to pique your interest, right? We want you to do that research. We want you to be excited about learning, all right? Because most of us kind of stop at, okay, well, it is what it is, but why is that the case, right? Why does this happen? So keep that in mind. So we have now maybe poked some holes in being able to explain what the deal is with gravity. Okay, so maybe we're thinking now, I guess I don't know that much about gravity. I guess maybe I don't know anything. And when I was when we were creating this presentation, I thought it was a little funny. I was like, oh boy, right? Because again, most of us just take it, we put it in our pocket and we walk away, but we don't necessarily think about how this, all of the questions behind it. Because again, maybe we just forget how to learn and what it means to learn and how that ties into comprehension. It's very important. Okay, so second step, what are the different perspectives, right? So you can explain it. Let's say you can explain theory of relativity to me. You can explain how distance ties in. You can explain how quantum physics ties in. That's great. It's all handy dandy. You get 100%. But can you defend that against someone's opposing view on the subject, right? What led them to create or to vocalize their point of view and how they go against the literature, for example? Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. There are some people who don't believe in gravity? Absolutely. All right. And they are called the Anti-Gravity Alliance. You can look them up online if you'd like. All right. And they have an entire list of supporters or websites that collaborate with them. Okay. AGA for short, Anti-Gravity Alliance. Okay. It doesn't stop here. There are the National Center for Science and Education. It writes that gravity is only a theory. Okay, so we think about the word theory. Most of us know a theory, right? Theory and a fact, because we thought gravity was a fact, right? Wait a minute, what's going on here, right? What is this lady talking about this morning on YouTube? Again, we are just digging into the different perspectives, and theory is a pretty big word to use. All right, so why is it only considered a theory? Individuals that are writing, their dissertations for maybe a PhD, they're writing that gravity is a myth. And this is something that was written fairly recently, 2018. So if you want to read any of these articles, feel free to send us a message and we can send those to you. But again, we have now poked a giant hole in what, for one, maybe we thought we understood really well, and it looks like we didn't, right? Maybe for some of us. I'm not saying everyone, but, right? So we have to explain it. We talked about explaining, right? And maybe you were able to explain, but now how do you defend gravity to someone who is not a supporter or a believer in that. Okay. And we've found some astrophysicists that are on YouTube. This is just one of them, Dr. Brian Keating, who doesn't believe in gravity. Okay. And so now we're kind of like, well, what? Right? Now you may be thinking, oh, they're this or they're that, but let's try to understand those perspectives, because again, it can help us understand what we think we know really well. Or maybe it turns out we don't know it. Okay. So keep that in mind. I'm sure most of us are like, what? I had no idea. And yeah, I didn't know either that there was an anti-gravity alliance before we created this presentation. I had no idea. My mind was blown, right? But I read through everything that I found, obviously using those speed reading techniques, and it's pretty interesting information. So I'll leave that to you. If you'd like to research it, feel free to do so. All right, so we have talked about the different perspectives. We're probably a little surprised now, right? Let's get into our self-knowledge. And guess what? It actually is all about you, right? Some people are like, oh, it's not all about you. Yes, it is. When we're talking about learning, absolutely. Yes, it is. It is all about you, right? You're the one that's learning, so absolutely. Now, we want you to look for some functionality and purpose as you're learning, okay? What is the purpose behind what we're learning, right? What is the function behind what we're learning? Maybe applying it to some real world scenarios, for example. Now, what are some things that we may do on a day-to-day basis that involve gravity, right? Because again, we're talking about gravity. That's the theme of our presentation. So what about eye drops, right? I would imagine that the sale of eye drops after St. Patrick's Day goes up quite a bit, right? We don't have to get into why, but right. Anyway, eye drops, when we put them in our eyeballs, we know that the drop is going to come down. It's not going to float up into the air, right? So there's some practical function right there. Okay, so think about, again, how this ties into you. Maybe you use eye drops. You know, oh, well, thank goodness for gravity, because if they floated up, we wouldn't be able to use them, right? And there are other things, obviously, but this was just a simple illustration to prove, again, functionality and purpose. And again, your own self-knowledge. All right, we are 50% of the way there. Right now we've got our juices flowing with gravity. We're maybe asking questions. We're maybe like, wait a minute, I'm confused, right? And that's good. We want you to think those thoughts, because again, that's going to pique your interest to do research, ask even more questions, which are very, very important when learning, and obviously when trying to comprehend something. Now let's move on to empathy. All right, empathy. Can you empathize with this subject, with this author, with this person? Can you empathize? Okay. Now, if we have some people in the audience thinking, well, what are we going to empathize with gravity, Cynthia? Well, good question. Who can you think of that maybe goes from time to time without gravity? And that would be of astronauts, right? At NASA. So maybe you're thinking, oh, well, they signed up to be astronauts. They studied to be astronauts. So they know that there's no gravity. How are we don't have to empathize. They chose that, right? That was a comment we received. However, let's think about some of the things we do here on Earth every day, and how gravity, we're so grateful that we have gravity, because again, we might take it for granted. They don't always have it. So have you ever wondered, this might seem a little silly, but have you ever wondered what it's like to go to the bathroom up in space? To go to the bathroom, okay? Because here on Earth, we don't have to worry about anything happening, right? Because gravity will make everything, you know, flush down. But how does that work up in space? Just think about that for a second. Okay. Now, you might be wondering, well, wait, you're right. What's the deal with the toilets on the spacecrafts? Well, we did, again, some research, and this article was published in 2013 by the Smithsonian. How do astronauts go to the bathroom in space? All right, and they spend, after doing, obviously reading through these, you can find this on the Smithsonian's website, but again, if you want a copy of the article, I can forward the link over to you. But the article pretty much discusses a lot of training, right? Something called a positional trainer when using these fancy toilets on the aircrafts. All right. Previous designs, if you're interested, involved like strapping the astronaut onto the toilet with like 4 different straps to make sure that they wouldn't float away. So just imagine, right, having to go to the washroom and then having all these tethers tied to you to make sure you don't float away and have some kind of accident. All right. So maybe can we now empathize with astronauts? And that's just if using the bathroom, but what of other things that we do here on Earth that we don't have to worry about it because we know gravity will take its course. Another fun one, if you're interested, is what happens when an astronaut burps up in space. Now, we won't answer that, but it's nice to see how gravity, you know, I'm so much more grateful because a burp up in space can be catastrophic, but, you know, look it up, do some research, send me an email, let me know what you found on the subject. Again, we're piquing interest. These might sound like some silly questions, but we are deepening, again, our comprehension on gravity, okay? Moving along here, how can we apply the information, the subject, practically? This one's pretty simple because, again, we know that with gravity, if we throw something, it's going to hit the ground at a certain point, right? So a question you might ask is, how is this applied in the larger world? Again, when we have those subjects that we're just not jiving with them, we don't like them, right? We might just be miserable in class, but we want to find, again, a way to use it in the real world. That example from algebra previously, when I was in high school and I was like, I will never have to use this. That's not the case, right? I had to use some of those skills when we were in nursing school, for example, or when I was in nursing school. So again, maybe in the moment it doesn't feel like it matters, but how can it apply later? All right. Or maybe just do some research. Google it. What does this have to do with the real world? How can I use this? Because I can't think of anything, right? And you'll be surprised the answers that you'll find, again, when doing this research on practical application. So let us now touch on our final point, which is interpretation, or the interpretation by others. Now, we're not talking about language interpretation. We are talking about artistic representation, okay? There are certain sculptures around the world that are anti-gravity, I guess you would say, or gravity-defying sculptures. If you look at this, you might be thinking, as I was when I found it, how this is even staying up, right? All right, but very interesting, again, just the research on the artist who, now again, I'm not going to give you all of the answers because, again, the point of the presentation was to ask the questions so that you, right, your interest is piqued and you want to read more on the subject because, again, I'm going to repeat, I know I sound like a broken record, but this is going to help deepen our comprehension. However, I will give you the name of this sculpture in case you're interested, and this was The Force of Nature by Lorenzo Quinn. Okay, so if you're interested in looking up the sculpture, again, it's called The Force of Nature by Lorenzo Quinn. Have you ever seen this? before. All right, this is the Fontainebleau Castle in Paris, France, and this is not like some kind of AI picture, right? We didn't use Chat GTP to make this. This is real. And it is indeed an elephant, right? Holding himself up by his tusk, or his, his nose. You know what I'm talking about, right? And it's really something pretty spectacular to look at. So again, we're thinking about gravity. I'm not just showing these pictures here to be funny, but gravity, how does this apply? How did they get this enormous animal to balance itself like that? All right. We have the floating rocks in Cairo. Okay. How is gravity being defied here? What is this? Right? I would love to see the floating boulders or the floating rocks in Cairo. Here's another one, and this is probably my favorite. These are some book sculptures that can be found around Madrid, Spain. Okay, this is only 2 of them, but I believe there are 6 or 7 throughout Madrid, similar. And I thought to myself, no amount of glue can keep that together. How did they do it? Right? So again, we're thinking about gravity, we're thinking about what we thought we knew versus what we now know we don't know, and then we're seeing this and we're like, what is happening here? But again, our comprehension, we are working with this comprehension. Okay, so let's do a quick run through of everything we've talked about up until now. We've talked about being able to explain something, and how explaining is a good first step, but it shouldn't be your only step to prove that you understand it, right? Explain it to a teacher, explain it to a colleague, right? You guys got it, I'm sure. What are the different perspectives on the subject? Remember the Anti-Gravity Alliance. Do some research on that, right? Not every subject will have an opposing view, but you might be surprised what you find out there. All right, so different perspectives on that. Can you defend what you think you know versus someone who is saying what you're saying is not true? Can you defend it? Okay. Your self-knowledge. It is all about you. Okay. How can you use this? What is the function and practicality of this, or the purpose? I'm sorry. How can we use it? How do we use it on a daily basis? And not so much about other people. Again, we want you to focus on yourself when we're talking about learning. So yes, this might sound a little selfish, but it is, again, all about you. Empathy. We talked about empathizing with the subject. All right. With gravity, we were maybe a little shocked, right? Maybe we've never thought about having to go to the bathroom up in space. Now we did, right? And it's pretty shocking. So again, empathy helps deepen that comprehension as well. Practical application, all right? Fairly simple, especially when that subject starts to be something that we thought it wasn't, right? And then I say we all have subjects, right? I thought that taking a language class, for example, was going to be the best thing in the world, and for a specific language, and then I hated it because I had signed up for 3 years to take that class. But turned out, after thinking about it, I could use that language here in the city of Chicago. Okay, I had just never met anyone that spoke that language. So that was, again, something that helped change my attitude or my approach on that class, because I was really unhappy. And final step is interpretation, artistic interpretation, right? It reminds me, there is a piece written by Gustav Holst called Planets. It's very interesting. They are coming to Chicago. I think, not him, but I think it will be performed here in Chicago at the Symphony Center. I bring it up because this is a piece written by this individual, and he wrote one, if I'm not mistaken, one piece on each of the planets, right? It's called Planets, but one on each of the planets. And I know, obviously, we're talking about gravity, but space, gravity, planets, they're all kind of in the same family, right? Obviously. So it just reminded me, it's an interesting piece to listen to. Definitely recommend YouTubing it. And again, it's called Gustav Holst's Planets. Okay, but again, what is the artistic representation, right? And there are so many other pictures, portraits, statues that we found when researching other artistic representations of gravity, right? There's also certain music, but I don't know if it would sound, sharing my screen plus playing YouTube audio, but streaming on live. So the point is just let's just do some research on that, okay? Because again, we don't want to just get consumed in reading the same passage 77 times, right? And just fixating on that. That's not enough when we're talking about comprehension. Okay, that's more of rote repetition, and that doesn't help us neither memorize nor understand something. So let's keep that in mind. Let's use these 6 points when trying to better understand a subject, and hopefully we will do better in our class, right? If we're maybe struggling. Now, want to quickly touch a little bit on inspecting, okay? Inspecting can also help with comprehension. When we do inspect, we look for the following things. So we look for the intro, headings and subheadings, words in bold, titles of charts, tables, and diagrams, the conclusions, and any questions published in the piece, okay? Remember I said in the beginning, if we start reading something and we haven't inspected it yet, you might be like, well, how long is this chapter? Right? I had no idea this was going to be 15, 20 pages. I haven't had enough coffee yet. I need a Red Bull, right? Or something else. Again, this helps with our comprehension. We see these words that will be repeated. Maybe we're familiar with some of them, maybe we're not. We see some tables, we see some pictures, right? We see the intro and the conclusion. All of this can help us, again, better understand. And obviously also tying in those 6 points we've discussed earlier. Now, new rule for the rest of your life, I hope you will inspect anything you need to read moving forward, whether that be a chapter, a report, a journal article, a contract, a menu, it doesn't matter. We want you to inspect, all right? Familiarize yourself with whatever you need to read before you actually nosedive into the content. Now, let us now see, let's read. We're going to do another exercise where we're going to read, and maybe you can think of some of these questions that we have talked about today, right? Those 6 different dimensions. So the article, you can find it at irisreading.com/comp. The article we'll use is flow.pdf. Okay, it looks like this, and I'm going to inspect it with you all quickly here. So the title is Going with the Flow. That introductory quote says, life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. Okay. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like, by Lao Tzu. Okay. Let's inspect the titles, or the subheadings, I'm sorry, or the headings. Number 1, realize you can't control everything. Bummer. Okay, number 2, become aware. Number 3, breathe. Number 4, get perspective. 5 is practice. 6 is laugh. Oh, I like to laugh. And 7 is realize that you can't control others. Oh, all right. So now we maybe got a few thoughts on these subheadings or these headings. We may be thinking a little bit about that quote. So now we are going to read. We're going to finish reading the article. Okay, so I'm going to give you up until 2 minutes to read it. I recognize most of us will not be able to finish reading the article, but again, let's just read as much as we can. Maybe think about everything we've talked about until now. See if we actually comprehended, right? And let's see if our comprehension is a little better the second time around. So for this, I will disable my webcam. Let me just close out of here. It's going to minimize my screen, so let me open it up again. All right. Here we go. So I'm going to disable my webcam, start my timer, and go ahead and start reading, and I'll be back at the 2-minute mark. Alrighty, so that was our second drill. Okay, we read for 2 minutes. And now let's assess our comprehension. So I know this is pretty speedy. We do have to wrap up today's presentation. We are thinking about making this presentation a little bit longer, only because we wanted to actually talk about, right? See some of the takeaways, some of that, all of that info that we talked about earlier, explanation, self-application, interpretation, thinking about that as we are processing the information. So if you would like to give yourself a second score when we're talking about comprehension again, how did you feel you understood the information the second time around? Okay, did you feel like maybe you got 80, 90%? And then compare your two scores from the first to the second, right? Because again, we are now slowly developing some better comprehension skills. All right, so hopefully we did make improvement. This is our favorite guy, the Success Baby. Right, I wish he worked with us here at Iris Reading. But if you did make improvement, that is tremendous. If you didn't, that is okay as well. Again, this might be the first time that most of us are even hearing about the different dimensions of comprehension, right? And so not a problem. Remember, you can always come back to listen to this recording on YouTube. You can also reach out to us if you would like maybe a little more support on the subject. All right. And remember that when we're inspecting, we're just getting the gist of what we're about to read first. Okay. It's like the appetizer before the entree, right? So keep that in mind. Don't forget about our IRIS method. Okay, easy to remember because we are Iris Reading and we do have that acronym after our company name, so that should be fairly easy to remember, right? That was actually why that was created in that way. So inspect, don't forget, inspect anything you need to read before you read it. Read, ask the questions, all the questions, everything we talked about up today, and then we move on to our final step, which is storing. Okay, but again, remember, you don't want to try to memorize anything you don't understand because that doesn't really work. It's almost like memorizing something that's really big, but also really empty. All right, so we don't want you to do that, please. All right, if you enjoyed those passages that we shared earlier today, the author has actually given us permission to share the book, the entire book. So if you'd like a copy of that book, send me an email at cynthia@irisreading.com. Let me know you were here today, and I can send that to you immediately. With that, we are wrapping up today's presentation. Once again, my name is Cynthia. I hope to work with you in the future. Don't forget about our social media. Please, please check us out. And if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to send us a message either on those platforms or via email, again, at cynthia@irisreading.com. Have a good rest of your day, and I hope to hear from you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.